expiry of the time provided for oral questions. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary is rising on the point of order.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I suspect if you were to canvass the House, you would find unanimous consent to call at 1:30 at this time, so we could begin private members' hour.
Does the Honourable Member have unanimous consent to see the clock at 1:30? Agreed? Agreed, and so ordered.
It being 1:30, the House will now deal with private members' business according to today's order paper.
Ordre du jour,
Orders of the day, private members' business.
35, instruction to the Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development, environment grading label, standing in the name of Mr. Baptiste.
Mr. Baptiste, seconded by Monsieur Lamoureux, moves that the House recognizes that Canadians understand that climate change represents a threat to our way of life and are looking for opportunities where they can make a difference in their day-to-day lives.
Number 2, Canadian consumers want and deserve to know the environmental impacts of the products they purchase. So, dispense.
Debate. The Honourable Member for Sydney, Victoria.
Madam Speaker, today I have the privilege of speaking to my motion M-35, which, if adopted, would launch a study on the creation of an environmentally conscious labeling regime. Madam Speaker, if you would, indulge me and envision a Canada where a consumer can walk into a store and pick up two similar products and imagine that through a trusted label on the package that they choose the product that is better for our environment and our future. Imagine a Canada where consumers know each day what their carbon footprint is by the choices they make that day, as well as other important environmental factors. Imagine going into restaurants across Canada and seeing a consistent environmental grade to help those who wish to make environmentally friendly choices. Madam Speaker, climate change represents an existential threat to our way of life and our prosperity. It is a challenge of our time, and addressing it will require a Canadian-wide approach. Let me be clear. Government has an important role to play. Industry has a role to play. And yes, individuals, each and every one of us, all have a role to play. I believe Canadians understand this. They are able, they are willing. Put simply, Canadians, if given the opportunity, will make choices every day that help slow the effects of climate change. While it is true that emissions are largely driven by our largest businesses, those businesses are driven in part by us, the consumers. Some farmers have suggested that every time we pick up a fork or spoon, we are voting. We are making a choice for our future. Our actions and our choices in day in, day out may only have incremental impacts, but together we can drive large-scale change through individual responsibility and the global marketplace. The policy and vision being proposed today is a study of an environmental grading label, a label that takes into account factors like greenhouse gas emissions, energy and water usage, and waste created. Such a label on products would encourage buying local and would have a positive economic impact for our country while empowering everyday Canadians to do their part in the struggle against climate change. Imagine for a moment that on the label, just below the calories and ingredients, the carbs, that there was a clear indicator of a product's environmental impact. Imagine being at a grocery store and being able to compare the environmental impacts of two brands of canned meat right there in the aisle. In a world of more choice and options when shopping, you can choose organic, local, and Canadian raised. The next step is to give consumers opportunities to spend their money on choices with less environmental impact. Colleagues, having that information available, presented clearly and concisely, and being empowered to make the environmental choice if you want to. Colleagues, That's what environmentally friendly labeling is about, empowering consumers through information so that they can make the choices that reflect their beliefs. I first tabled this motion in February of 2019. The world looked very different back then. And if you had told me the next time I would be speaking in Parliament this motion, it would be from my dining room table, I probably wouldn't have believed you. And yet, I speak today from my home as a result of a global crisis. We already know that a climate crisis is on the horizon. Many would say it is already here. The United Nations has been clear on our need to cut our carbon footprint in half globally within 10 years. The UN Secretary General has stated there has never been a more important time to listen to science. Failure to heed these warnings and take drastic actions to reverse emissions means we will continue to witness deadly and catastrophic heat waves, storms, and pollutions. We've heard the alarm bell sounding for decades, and yet Canadians often feel there is nothing they can do personally to stop it. Environmental labeling would give them that capability. The motion I present today is just one part of the solution. This I know, but it's a vision for a better Canada that empowers consumers with the ability to make an environmentally friendly choice every day. This motion came about because of the concerns I've heard from my constituents across Cape Breton about the largest crisis facing our future. The youth in my riding and ridings across Canada are frightened of the future we are leaving to them. And indeed, I agree that the burden we have left to future generations is unfair. But we can take steps to change that as leaders. We can make a better world. The battle is not lost. Canada can help lead that battle. As I've said, Canadians are looking for a way that they can contribute. But when facing challenges like climate change, one that is systemic and global, it can seem overwhelming. Businesses around the world have recognized this shift and realized that consumers want to act. Let me give you a few examples. The Shelton Group, a sustainability-oriented ad agency, has noted that people want to do their part, but the problem can seem too enormous. A recent study by Ogilvy Earth Division found that while that more than 80% of American shoppers claim to want to make more sustainable choices, many don't. Another study has similar results, with 87% of consumers concerned about environmental impacts of their personal buying habits. There is no singular reason for this discrepancy, but it is clear that one of the biggest contributing factors is awareness. A survey by McKinsey and Company showed that while consumers want to do their part, they do not know how to act on that belief. The study noted in particular that many attempts to label green products have been meaningless at best and confusing at worst. On top of that, there just isn't any consistency. In many cases, these labels are useless to the consumer and vague. It is unclear what standards are being used and if consistent across the country. We need to begin to have a consistent standard on what it is to have green or environmentally friendly products. To quote then CEO Steve Howard of Climate Group, referring to one attempt to label a product based on a life cycle analysis, he asked, "What does it mean to say a bag of chips contains 70 grams of carbon?" He continued to say, "I have a PhD in environmental physics, and it does not mean a thing to me." In other cases, the labeling regimes resemble a PR exercise more than an attempt to communicate any quantifiable or qualitative information about the product. Worse, because of limited and haphazard adoption of this practice, mostly by bigger companies, local businesses who many cases would be major beneficiaries of greater consumer awareness are left behind. Local farmers and businesses, by virtue of being local, are often the best choice for our environment. But they are often left in the dust by large farm factories and companies who can pour significantly more PR dollars into packaging and communications. This is a place where the government can step up. This is where we, as legislators, have a clear role to fulfill. The government has a long-standing role in mandating that companies present information to consumers on the basis of public health, public interest, and democratic will. The environmental impact of the products we consume clearly fulfills all three of these criteria. Moreover, Parliament is in the unique position to be able to bring together experts and stakeholders from across industry and academia to determine not only what information should be considered in such as labeling regime, but how to express it to the consumer in a manner that is clear, concise, and comprehensible for everyday Canadians. As such, this motion would empower a standing committee to summon industry, summon small business, summon environmental experts, academics, farmers to come up with a collaborative way forward. This committee mandate would be tasked with reporting to the House their recommendations on how we can move forward as legislators in creating of a labeling regime. The labeling regime would empower and inform consumers while benefiting local economies and incentivizing greener business practices from our biggest companies. An environmental labeling regime would help make Canada a world leader in fighting climate change. It is a bold and practical step forward to address climate change. It would bring greater legitimacy to our efforts to lead on the world stage. It would set an example for green transparency and consumer rights. It would truly be a cultural shift of monumental proportions. Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve to know the environmental impacts of the products they purchased so that they can make informed decisions. Growing up in Cape Breton and growing up listening to people who care about our beautiful ecosystem and ensuring quality of life for future generations is vital. I was taught from Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers that the choices we make today must take into consideration the next 7 generations. I was taught that we are connected to our environment. Whatever we do to environment, we do to ourselves. What I am proposing is taking an important step towards environmental reconciliation. Government studies and motions can be a vision for a better tomorrow. This motion ensures a proactive role by bringing together consumer interests in Canadian business to create a clear and concise metric by which Canadians can consider the impacts of their buying habits. This will empower Canadians by helping make environmental choices every day to protect our environment and our future. Madam Speaker, I believe that if Canadians were informed about things like the waste created, water used, and greenhouse emissions of the products they purchase, that they would make better choices for future generations. I believe that when industries see that Canadians consumers want to do their part, that they too will make the necessary changes to their products. I believe that this motion, if passed, is a win for our planet, for our country, for Canadian businesses, and for Canadians from coast to coast to coast. Thank you. Walalio. Merci.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Central Okanagan's Milkameen, Nicola.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I certainly appreciate all members when they bring their individual private members' motions or private members' bills to this place. It's an opportunity for members of Parliament to show where their priorities are. But I'd like to ask the member, Madam Speaker, by utilizing the term all products in Canada, what is this saying to small micro entrepreneurs who, let's just say, assemble small jewelry or crafts? What about restaurants that right now that are struggling and want to put out a new product, perhaps a house salad dressing or vinaigrette? Why would they have to go through the cost of figuring out how much water they use, how much greenhouse gas emissions there are in the product? To me, it seems that this member is asking for these small micro businesses that are already suffering under COVID-19 to bear a lot of red tape.
Honourable member for Sydney Victoria.
I thank the member opposite for his comments. Just this week, I went to a farm where I purchased meat, I purchased vegetables, and from local farmers. None of these had the nutritional guides on it that Canadians have said is law. I think that when you go to flea markets, where you go into small business, this is not the burden that we're placing on them. However, I would add that local and farms and local businesses are the ones who will benefit the most from this, because they are in as fast by local. are probably the most environmentally friendly. And this is something that a study can really dive into and ensure that we're making sure that we're not burdening small and medium-sized enterprises with this.
The honourable member for Repentigny. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I read the motion tabled by the member. I wonder if he knows that eco-labelling already exists. I found that in his motion he did not take into account the role played by Quebec and other provinces in managing eco-labelling. So, what does he think about this all?
Member for Sydney Victoria.
I'd like to thank the member for her question. And indeed, there are a number of restaurants, there are a number of provinces, there are a number of places taking leadership on that. But the problem is they're inconsistent. And what I'm proposing is a Canada-wide labeling program that is consistent. And I understand that there are different eco-labeling, but it's just too confusing to the consumers. And what we're looking for is clear and concise, consumer-friendly information just by looking at the package and understanding what that means. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Victoria.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And thank you to the member for bringing forward this motion. It is unclear how effective eco-labeling really is on influencing consumer behavior and ultimately on reducing environmental impacts. A study from the UK ultimately recommended that companies be required to modify the source of their products rather than rely on consumer decisions. Eco-labels could be good for consumer choice and demand for more sustainable products to help push producers to create more environmentally friendly products. But my concern is the focus on the individual here, especially when we have a government who recently put forward a climate bill that had no target for 2025, no accountability for 10 years, when we have a government who bought a pipeline and who has taken decades to modernize the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. The member opposite talked about eco-labels being inconsistent. Well, this government is inconsistent, and I'm wondering how he stands behind that.
The honourable member for Sydney Victoria.
I'd like to thank the member for her comment. And, you know, one of the things that I can only share from my experience of being a member of Parliament for a year is that we all have a role to play moving forward. But I've been Mi'kmaq for my entire life, and Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous knowledge holders have told Canadians for generations that we need to do more for our environment, that we need to foster those relationships that we create. In fact, Indigenous scholars are out there asking for now environmental reconciliation. We all have a role to play in this. And I hope that this is something that we can look towards and saying, this is a positive step, along with all the other things that we're doing. And I'm proud of the fact that I have a government that just yesterday stepped up and made sure that in the future that we will have accountability for environmental, for our environment. Thank you very much.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the chance to speak about this motion from the member for Sydney Victoria. I would like to start by saying I agree with the beginning of the motion that says Canadians are looking for opportunities to make an environmental difference in their day-to-day lives. Also, more information is certainly a good thing. However, this motion and its goals have serious problems that I'd like to speak about today. It is undoubtedly true that a great many consumers use and like products every day that have labels that mark them as environmentally friendly. These labeling regimes are virtually all voluntary and it's each company that decides if it's going to participate and if that's in its best interest. Certainly a great many do, and that's an example of the market at work. Now, from eco-logo to marine stewardship to organic produce, these voluntary labeling regimes have been very advantageous for a great many businesses. Indeed, a report from the OECD on labeling regimes like the one proposed by the member states that except for labeling related to energy efficiency, virtually every regime is voluntary. However, the language in the motion related to recommend a consumer-friendly environment grading label on all products available to Canadian consumers, end quote, is full of pitfalls. First, that the motion instructs the committee to recommend a regime. There is no allowance that the committee could study various regimes and then decide to not recommend any labeling. committees must be allowed to determine the results of their own studies.
Second of all, while it is important that any regulation be consumer-friendly, there is no reference at all to being production or industry-friendly in this motion. Any eventual regulations must be designed to ensure that those on the producer side are not unfairly punished. And for those who think that I'm only talking about big business, allow me to give an example of how this system could hurt small businesses. The member refers to a labelling regime or system that would affect all products in Canada, which, by my reckoning, means that it would be mandatory. The motion also refers to the aspects that would be part of this system, including greenhouse gas emissions, water, and energy consumption. This proposal could have a devastating impact on Canada's small businesses. For example, someone who operates an Etsy store as a side job and makes their own jewellery. Will this entrepreneur now have to include lifetime greenhouse gas emissions in the small jewellery he or she sells? What about a small family restaurant that decides to bottle and sell their homemade sauce? Will they have to hire a consultant to measure and calculate lifetime energy and water consumption from this product in order to meet labelling requirements? I expect the member to imagine huge companies that can do those calculations much more easily when he tabled this motion. However, when the motion deals with a system that applies to all products in Canada, we are talking about products in Canada. The ultimate effect of such a system would be to almost complete destruction of small product-based Canadian businesses. There is absolutely no way that they could comply with such a system.
And what else would do is create a booming industry for consultants at the expense of higher consumer prices as business struggled to comply with these rules and the added costs. Now, the member from Sydney Victoria may say, that's not the situation I want. That's why I'm calling for a study. Well, but then why so clearly lay out in the motion that he expects the committee to, and I quote, recommend a consumer-friendly environment grading label on all products available to Canadian consumers, end quote. He doesn't say, look into the regimes and see what are best practices. He says to recommend a regime that applies to all products. If the member disagrees with my interpretation, then he's perfectly willing to perhaps amend his own motion to make this abundantly clear. I would now like to briefly touch on the regimes that already exist and why strictly voluntary regimes are ideal. The Global Eco-Label Index lists 456 different regimes globally that address various environmental measures. I've given a few examples earlier, but many of these will be well known to Canadians. For example, the organic label has long been used by producers and consumers to make buying choices. It's completely voluntary, and many choose to use it. Ecologo is another one used in Canada that shows a product is among the top 20% most environmentally friendly products in the market. Now, I know dining in restaurants is down now, but I am sure many people will recognize the ocean-wise symbol that demonstrates seafood that meets certain sustainability principles. I give all of these examples, Madam Speaker, to show that these labels are not a bad thing. The issue is when they are forced upon companies without understanding of the impacts. I completely support any producer or company who believes that applying and complying with these regimes is the best for their business. Madam Speaker, I also completely support any consumers who wish to make their buying decisions based on that information. That is the free market at work, a willing buyer and a willing seller. But what I don't support is a top-down Ottawa knows best regulation that removes producer choice and destroys small businesses. An OECD report states that the negatives of mandatory regimes like those being considered in this motion is that they have huge compliance costs and increased complexity of supply chains. Un régime obligatoire à l'échelle du
A mandatory Canada-wide regime that requires small and medium-sized businesses to track this information would be completely impossible to comply with and would destroy so many businesses that are barely surviving the pandemic. StatsCan data shows that the self-employed, many of whom would be affected, continue to bear the brunt of the pandemic on their businesses. This Liberal plan would kick them when they're already down. Let's not do that and instead find ways to support our struggling businesses. I would be remiss if I did not mention my frustration with the use of House motions to control committee agendas. I spoke about this in the context of M-34 just a few weeks ago. I sit on the Environment Committee, and each party has some excellent studies to propose, and we have little time. It's not appropriate for a member of Parliament who is not even on the committee to move a motion that would require 12 meetings. 12, Madam Speaker. This motion would cripple the committee for months at a time when we have a lot of important work to do today. The mover of the previous motion was willing to amend the motion to make it more acceptable in this regard. And I wonder if this member would be open to the same thing. A motion that directs a committee to recommend a plan is not appropriate and not a valid study. If the intent of the motion was to study the operation of this voluntary plan and let the committee decide the number of meetings, then we would be in a different situation. But as I said, I'm very concerned about this motion and its impact on Parliament and Canadian businesses, especially small businesses, Madam Speaker, that are working hard to thrive, attacking entrepreneurs. Your time is up.
Alors, peut-être à la prochaine lecture.
Maybe at next reading.
Mais je veux féliciter le député pour son français.
I would like to congratulate the member for his French. He's made a great deal of progress.
Reprise de débat, l'honorable.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Repentigny. Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank our colleague from Sydney, Victoria, for the intent behind his motion. As environment critic, I am concerned about government action and the quality of policies chosen, but I must nevertheless point out the shortcomings in this motion. First of all, the Bloc Québécois is opposed to M-35, even though it considers that environmental labeling has its virtues, and the existence of this mechanism is relevant because over the past 40 years there has been growth in the number of eco-labels. But the wording of this motion calls for 12 meetings. That would take a lot of time. The wording of the motion itself poses a number of, shall we say, irregularities, starting with the fact that it identifies the government as having the jurisdiction to create, and I quote, a clear and precise mechanism to assess the impact of consumption patterns. That's not the role of a government to operationalize that. So the wording is so vague that there have been many documents written on it. Eco-labeling already exists, so the rigidity of the system brings forth the three different types of system we have: certification, self-declaration, and environmental production declaration. In Quebec, for example, there are 10 certification organizations related to construction and renovation, another 10 for residential and industrial cleaning products, 8 for electronic devices, 13 for the food sector, and the list goes on. The motion ignores the role played by Quebec in the management of a responsibility over eco-labeling. And it would be impossible to cover all of these. And it couldn't apply to all consumer goods either, because each sector and each subsector has its own unique characteristics. You don't analyze environmental viability or carbon footprint of a food or fish in the same way you do as a household appliance. And if we were to, that would be quite something. I'd like to point out that Canada imports a great number of products, and the wording of this motion would have these goods under consideration as well. Each organization behind a logo must provide clear information on the criteria applied to authorize the use of its logo, and this information must be accessible to the consumer. The criteria behind a logo cannot be standardized. From a commercial point of view, products that display such an eco-friendly affiliation promote it. Their manufacturers have made efforts, organizational and financial efforts, and put in place procedures to have the privilege of indicating their environmental probity. To a large extent, they undertake the process knowing that their market segment will be sensitive to it. In other words, there's an important business component to consider in this ecosystem that is eco-labeling. Consumer appreciation for the companies that participate in this good corporate relationship is real and growing, and I think that that is very good news. But that means that consumers in Quebec and Canada and around the world, where systems exist, can make choices. For the average citizen, sensitive to environmental issues caused by the goods they consume, eco-labeling will generate a sense of satisfaction, it will comfort them in their values, and it will help with environmental protection. And some consumers only buy certified products. Having a company adhere to a certification process is like progress that it commits to accomplishing, and that's not insignificant. Let's talk about companies that have implemented ISO 14000. The Quebec Standardization Office, the expert on this standard and its implementation in Quebec, knows the positive impact for thousands of companies. Some labels even come with other aspects. M-35 gives the impression that eco-labeling is non-existent, but nothing could be further from the truth. The Quebec Department of the Environment's website has information on this. The Competition Bureau of Canada has also been working closely with the Canadian Standards Council on this. And yes, Canada has national expertise in standardization, and to understand what M-35 wants to implement, we must work within a standardization framework. And considering this type of framework would be important to prevent greenwashing. To obtain logos or accreditations related to the environment, the dimension of this type of framework is omnipresent. Now, I'm not disclosing anything major to members by saying that we already know the impact of several sectors of the economy. We need to avoid excluding the potential of eco-labeling and the green shift that's needed. But we need to focus on sector-specific actions like developing energy efficiency and recovery in all sectors, requiring Canadian manufacturers to optimize their production with processes that are safe for the environment, human health. Emphasize work on updating chemical products to be banned and monitoring production conditions in this industrial sector. Promoting organic and responsible agriculture and livestock farming practices where proximity production destination is a priority, and supporting production activities that make a place in the life cycle for their products. So there are many areas that we could take action. Now, I'd like to shift gears a little bit here and say that the colleague contextualizes his motion by saying that Canadians, and I quote, know that climate change is a significant threat to their way of life and are looking for ways to make a difference in their daily lives. Individual responsibility is commendable, and guiding our consumer choices based on our values is laudable as well. We buy, we assume. Members of the government should stop pointing fingers at citizens for their climate action and turn to the big players, those who have a real impact on the outcome of what is affecting us. The oil and gas sector, the nuclear sector. We need to see legislation with teeth to enable us to achieve our objectives. And I can't wrap up my remarks without mentioning another type of labeling of GMOs. Now, I know that we're not asking whether or not that creates greenhouse gas emissions, but we're talking about the food that we eat. However, if there is one eco-labeling issue that warrants our attention, it is the labeling of GMOs. The vast majority of Quebecers have been calling for this for many years, for 10 years. And the requests for labeling in this area have always been denied. Since 1997, for 23 years, and in 2004, legislation was strengthened in Quebec. And in Europe, Europeans can know exactly what they're eating, but why can't we know that here? What is harmful, to use the term chosen for the motion, is already fairly convincing. We have seen on many occasions that the government has passed the buck when it comes to taking action on the threats posed by climate change. We get elected, we take responsibility, we make promises, we should keep them. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Victoria.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Canadians understand the threat of climate change and biodiversity loss. They want to be better consumers and make more sustainable choices. And environmental grading labels, or eco-labels, could provide Canadians with information about environmental impacts of products and allow them to make more informed choices. This could also incentivize producers to create more environmentally friendly and sustainable products to meet consumer demand. But we need to ensure that the burden of environmental protection does not fall on individuals alone. Any consumer labeling should always be coupled with strong regulatory standards and real climate action. The possibility of having the government implement an across-the-board environment grading label that includes greenhouse gas emissions, water and energy usage, and waste creation is certainly an interesting idea. Worldwide, there are 456 eco-labels in 199 countries, covering 25 industry sectors. These labels cover a wide range of environmental criteria for products from cosmetics to cleaning products, home and garden, or to clothing and paper products. Some eco-labels are created and managed on a national level, while others are international in scope. They may be based on a narrow set of considerations or a more complex full life cycle assessment. Consumers who want to make more environmentally friendly choices often have trouble recognizing the meaning of the wide range of labels they are faced with. It's not always obvious which specific environmental claims are true, what they mean, what assurances exist, if any, regarding their accuracy. While consumers distrust private businesses to provide credible environmental info, they do trust governments and environmental NGOs to provide that information. If the government were to play a role in implementing an environmental grading label for all products and services available to Canadian consumers, it could go a ways to address some of these issues. But it's also unclear how effective eco-labeling really is on influencing consumer behavior, and ultimately our goal of reducing the environmental impacts. As I mentioned, a study from the UK ultimately recommended that companies be required to modify the source of their products rather than rely on consumer decisions. Eco-labels could be good for consumer choice, and increased demand for sustainable products could help push producers to create more environmentally friendly products. But these labels should be attached to strong regulatory standards, so we're not just relying on consumers to shop defensively. We need to ensure that the burden of environmental protection and climate action does not fall on individuals. We should be taking strong action to strengthen regulatory standards and enforcement. We also need to be better on producer accountability, especially when it comes to plastics. The modernization and strengthening of the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, CEPA, is one way that this can be done, and it's a very important way. The Canadian Environmental Protection Act, its purpose is to prevent pollution and protect the environment and human health. It sets out rules for preventing and regulating toxic substances and for managing pollution. But CEPA is out of date and badly in need of reform. The House of Commons Standing Committee on the Environment and Sustainable Development reviewed CEPA in 2017 and made 87 recommendations to strengthen and modernize this act. But so far, the government has failed to act. One of those recommendations is that it's time to finally enshrine the right to a healthy environment in law. This is so important, and I want to give a shout out to the member from Winnipeg Centre who put forward a motion not only to enshrine the right to a healthy environment in law, but make sure that the foundation is built upon a recognition of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Too often, vulnerable and marginalized populations bear a disproportionate burden of environmental harm, and CEPA lacks provisions to protect those who have been made vulnerable and to safeguard against environmental injustice. We need protections for people who are inequitably impacted, including frontline workers, women, children, and the elderly, people living in pollution hotspots, too often Indigenous communities. The NDP would like to see an environmental Bill of Rights that will ensure that all Canadians can enjoy a guarantee to clean water, land, and air. These are the changes my NDP colleagues and I have been pushing for, but I also want to acknowledge two exceptional young people from my riding of Victoria who have been advocating for environmental rights since they were 7 and 10 years old. They have created a petition with the House of Commons urging the federal government to update CEPA, including amendments to recognize environmental rights in Canada. Today is the last day for the petition to be open for signatures. It has already gained 8,000 signatures from people across the country. I am awed, inspired, and thankful for the leadership that Franny and Rupert have shown in their advocacy. But young people shouldn't have to be advocating for these rights. Their government should be leading the way on protecting our environment and our health. When it comes to waste creation, Canadians thought they were doing their part when it came to recycling, but it turns out less than 10% of plastics disposed of by Canadians every year are recycled. And it's now clear that recycling alone is not enough. We need to also stop producing so much waste. Almost half of the plastic produced in Canada is from packaging, yet packaging is not included in the government's plan for a ban on the use of plastics. Dealing with our waste does not just mean disposing of it or recycling it. We need leadership on waste reduction targets and a plan to get to a zero waste Canada. In order to do that, producer accountability when it comes to the production of plastics is critical. Canada is not anywhere close to being on track to meeting its climate targets. And we know that those targets are not adequate to achieve the greenhouse gas reductions that we need to avoid catastrophic climate change. We're not even close, which is, I guess, the reason why the government is trying to avoid accountability for the next 10 years. The scope of the cuts to carbon emissions is so beyond what the government thinks is achievable, and it is definitely beyond what this bill and eco-labeling attempts to do through making more sustainable purchasing choices. Canadians want to do their part, but we should be careful not to emphasize individual purchasing choices over the bold systemic changes we need to address the climate crisis. We need to end fossil fuel subsidies. We need to implement real climate accountability, and we need to invest in sustainable jobs and a low-carbon future. Canadians understand that the threat of climate change and biodiversity loss poses a great existential threat to our environment, to our health, to our communities, and to our future. They want to be able to make better, more environmentally sustainable choices, but they also expect their government to do its part in protecting our land, air, and water. And one way of doing that is by setting strong environmental standards and requiring producer accountability. The burden of environmental protection can't fall on individuals alone, and we need to prioritize taking strong action to strengthen regulatory standards, modernizing SEPA, and taking bold action on the climate crisis. We cannot keep putting off action on the climate crisis. Canadians are worried about their future. Parents shouldn't have to worry about the air that their children breathe. And students and young people shouldn't have to march in the streets just to draw attention to the crisis that is happening because politicians and people in leadership positions aren't protecting their future. You know, the recent climate accountability bill was a good step forward, but it's not enough. This eco-labeling bill is an interesting idea, but we need to focus on what our priorities are, especially in the upcoming 10 years, which is why it's so egregious that this government has left out a 5-year milestone target, has put off accountability for the next decade, the most critical decade. You know, Jack Layton was the first person to put forward a climate accountability bill in the House, and he would not want us to wait another 10 years to see accountability. We need to push this government to take real climate action. We need investments in good jobs, in the kind of good, long-term, sustainable jobs of the future. I want to thank the member again for putting forward this motion, but I think we need to focus on what is important to Canadians, and that is real climate action.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for this opportunity to speak. I'm honored to rise today in support of my friend and colleague, the Honourable Member for Sydney Victoria, on his private member's motion, an instruction to the Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development. I'd like to thank the learned member for passionately bringing forward this considered motion and for his continued and tireless hard work in helping Canadians understand the environmental impacts of the products they buy and use. Our government shares the honourable member's concerns about the negative impacts of climate change and pollution, and we know that Canadians from coast to coast to coast are eager to take action on these important issues. When given accurate and accessible information, Canadians are eager in their day-to-day lives to make informed decisions about their health and the environment. Our government has already taken important steps to equip Canadians with clear, accurate, and objective information they need to understand the environmental impacts of the products they purchase and to confront the growing global crisis that is climate change. Madam Speaker, Canadians have long understood that more informative labeling and packaging can lead to more informed consumer decisions. Since 2007, when nutritional labeling became mandatory, Canadians have had the opportunity to make informed decisions about the food they put in their bodies. Nutrition labeling has been designed to be easy to find, simple to read, and to permit Canadians to make informed food choices. Essential information, such as where the food was grown, prepared, and packaged, has proven incredibly popular, as have counts of calories, vitamins, minerals, and preservatives, all of which, I might add, have been calculated to single servings. Now, Madam Speakers, Canadians want the same level of ease to find information about the environmental impact of consumer products when it comes to exercising their purchasing power. Just as Canadians want to know what they are putting in their bodies, they also want to know of their footprint on the environment. Instead of counting calories, they are counting carbon. Instead of asking what preservatives are in their food, they want to know how much particulate matter is in the air. And instead of protein, they are asking about pollution. Not all Canadians have weight loss goals, Madam Speaker, but almost all Canadians do have waste less goals. As always, Madam Speaker, our government understands that protecting the environment and growing the economy go hand in hand. Having access to this information could also help support Canada's transition to a circular economy. Moving towards a circular economy means focusing on new innovative approaches and technologies to create economic opportunities out of materials that might otherwise be thrown away as waste, while at the same time promoting innovative product and commodity designs that can easily lead to reuse or recycling. Canadians are already making environmentally responsible choices when they shop, and they want to play an active role in minimizing the environmental impacts of the products they buy and use. This is why so many cities and municipalities have taken steps to ban single-use plastic bags, and why we're seeing a wave of zero waste groups on social media. Madam Speaker, Canadians have said they are willing to pay more for sustainable products. While this shows that Canadians are ready to take strong action to protect the environment and to fight climate change, our government does not believe that Canadians should have to pay for making the right choices. This is why the Government of Canada has introduced the Climate Action Incentive as part of our plan to put a price on pollution and combat climate change. Madam Speaker, Canadians take these issues very seriously and are interested in knowing about the ingredients in the products they buy and how they can safely recycle products after their use and reuse. Canadians want the information they are looking for to be accessible, easy to find, and without the use of extra packaging. At this moment, Canadians are also keenly aware of affordability and competitiveness, as is our government. Consequently, the motion put forward by the honourable member would enable members and Canadians to better understand how product labeling can empower Canadians to take further action on important issues such as greenhouse gas emissions, water and energy usage, and waste generation. There is a lot of interest in the role of labeling. There is also a need to better understand both the ways in which it can be useful and some of the practical challenges associated with broader use of labeling requirements. I think the motion could be broadening its scope to include possible topics such as chemicals in products, recyclability, durability, and digital labeling. Therefore, Madam Speaker, I move that the motion be amended by A, replacing, in quotes, and subsection B, the Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development, be changed to B, the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology be instructed to. B, replacing subsection 3, schedule no fewer than 12 meetings for the study, to be changed to subsection 3, schedule no fewer than 6 meetings for the study. And C, adding in part B, subsection 2, after waste creation, the following chemicals and products, recyclability and durability, and which labeling to avoid increasing the need for packaging. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
In order to propose an amendment, the author of the amendment of the bill needs to be in favor of the amendment. Therefore, I would respectfully ask the honourable member for Sydney Victoria if he is in favor of the amendment. The honourable member for Sydney Victoria.
I am, Madam Speaker, and I would like to thank the Parliamentary Secretary for Industry, Science and Technology for his comments and for his really well thought out amendments.
So this is as per Standing Order 93.3. Therefore, given that there is consent, the amendment is in order. Mr. Asasi, seconded by Mr. Lamoureux, moved that the motion be amended by A, replacing and sub B, the Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development with the following, and sub B, the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology, and B, replacing sub 3, schedule, the 3 I's, schedule to fewer than 12 meetings for the study with the following, schedule no fewer than 6 meetings for the study, and C, adding in part B, sub 2, after waste creation, the following, chemicals in products, recyclability and durability, and which labeling could also include digital labeling to avoid increasing the need for packaging. The amendment is in order. Resuming debate, the honourable member for the honourable parliamentary secretary for the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry has 50 seconds left. Does he want to continue to add?
No, we're on resuming debate.
Oh, we're on resuming debate completely? Okay. I could just see the clock there. Okay. Resuming debate, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure of mine to be the seconder of this motion. And I think that the member has brought forward a vision in which many Canadians hold dear to their heart. Recognizing the value of packaging and labeling and how it is that we can better inform the consumer, I believe is in good part what this motion is about, and I thank the member also for moving forward with the amendment. When you think about it, Madam Speaker, I don't understand why it is people wouldn't support a motion that really wants to provide the opportunity for the consumer to be that much more knowledgeable. What we know, Madam Speaker, is that the people of Canada today want to be more sensitive to our environment and climate change. And legislation or motion that we're talking about today will further the cause of better informing consumers in terms of what it is that they're choosing and how it actually has an impact on our environment, Madam Speaker. And that is the reason why I feel fairly confident in terms of what it is that the member is hoping to be able to accomplish with this particular motion. I specifically look at our younger people, and I think that there's a lot that we can learn by the young people of Canada today as they continue to heighten the expectations of leaders today of all different political stripes, of different levels of government, and challenging us to move forward. And that is something in which the mover of the motion has done for all members of the House of Commons. By presenting this particular motion, Madam Speaker, what we're really talking about is asking members to recognize the reality, quite frankly, of what our constituents would want us to be looking at, Mr. Speaker, or Madam Speaker. And that is why I believe that the member has done a great service to the House of Commons by allowing for us to be able to participate in a debate which is really a very important debate. And I know that we will get another hour of debate coming up when the motion comes forward, and I look forward to that ongoing discussion on the motion, Madam Speaker. But suffice to say that when we take a look at the climate change, we just had a major announcement from the Minister and the Prime Minister yesterday responding to what it is that Canadians want us to bring forward, whether it's the climate action plan of the government of the day or a motion from a private member on a good initiative that combined or individually, it very much sends a strong message, Madam Speaker, and that is that we are listening and wanting to deliver in tangible ways, in which not only the bigger picture of government, but also the important role that the individuals in society have to play, Madam Speaker. And I look forward to being able to conclude my remarks when the motion comes up for debate next. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Unfortunately, the time is up. The time provided for the consideration of private members' business has now expired, and the order is dropped to the bottom of the order of precedence on the order paper. It being 1:57, this House stands adjourned until next Monday at 11 a.m. pursuant to Standing Order 24-1.